Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, on the eve of her wedding, Sophia Grant discovered the devastating truth her fiancé, Oliver Maxwell, saw her not as a partner but as a pawn. The man she loved for 3 years, the one whose family had become her own, had been using her wealth and devotion to expand Maxwell Enterprises while secretly planning a future with his mistress, Rebecca Thorne. With the support of his mother, Eleanor, and sister Claire, Sophia had once believed her life was perfect, but armed with evidence of Oliver's lies and corruption, she walked down the aisle not as a bride, but as a woman ready to shatter his carefully built empire in front of everyone who thought they knew him. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The evening before my wedding delivered a truth I never wished to discover, and today it was my turn to deliver one of my own. I never set out to be the bride who would bring her fiancé to ruin, but destiny has a cruel sense of timing. What should have been the happiest day of my life became the stage for betrayal and reckoning. Oliver Maxwell and I had spent 3 years together. On the surface, he was everything I could have dreamed of: wealthy, polished, and adored by a family that had become my own. Eleanor had filled the mother-shaped void in my life with warmth, and Claire had become the sister I never had. Everything seemed unshakably perfect, till I stumbled upon the truth. The night of his bachelor party at the Grand Royal Hotel, I went there only to hand him his grandfather's cufflinks Eleanor's request for the ceremony. Familiar with the staff, I walked through the hallways without hesitation. That's when I heard it. Oliver's unmistakable laugh drifting from a half-closed door, followed by James's teasing voice. "Come on, man. You can't really be serious about marrying Sophia." Oliver's reply cut through me like a blade. "Why not? She's ideal on paper. Her inheritance will grow Maxwell Enterprises, and her contacts are priceless. She's loyal, completely devoted." Laughter, then words that destroyed everything. "She's temporary. I'll stay with her until someone better comes along." The velvet box in my hand suddenly felt like stone. In that instant, every late meeting, every excuse, every small manipulation fell into place. My tears never came. Instead, a cold clarity took hold. That night, I opened my laptop. As his business partner, I had access to everything. By morning, I had evidence emails, accounts, records that could dismantle his entire world. When dawn broke, I applied my makeup with steady hands, not the trembling excitement of a bride, but the precision of someone preparing for war. My wedding dress became my armor, and the envelope I tucked away was my weapon. Eleanor visited me with pride in her eyes, fastening a family pearl necklace round my neck. Claire whispered her happiness as she adjusted my veil. Their love nearly broke my resolve, but not enough. My investigator confirmed more evidence just before noon: offshore accounts, missing funds, and emails to Rebecca Thorne, Oliver's mistress and business associate. By the time I walked into the church, I wasn't a bride, was executioner of a carefully crafted illusion. Guests rose, music swelled, and Oliver smiled at me from the altar. Ignorant of the storm about to hit, I reached the front and pulled the envelope from its hiding place. "Before we begin," I said to the congregation, my voice ringing clear, "I'd like to share a few readings, not scripture, but Oliver's private emails." Gasps filled the air as I read his words to Rebecca, outlining their plans after he secured my trust fund. Oliver tried to intervene, But I stepped back and let the documents scatter, exposing his fraud, his affair, his lies. Cameras flashed. Agents entered the church, and his empire began to collapse in front of 200 witnesses. He whispered, "Sophia, please, can we talk?" I answered coldly, "The way you talked about me. Temporary, until someone better came along." His charm shattered. Eleanor's face turned pale with horror. Claire sobbed, and Oliver was led away in handcuffs. I removed the pearls and placed them back in Eleanor's hand. "These belong to someone who deserves them. Not me, not today." As I walked out of the church, reporters waited, flashes exploding around me. The fairy tale was over, but in its place was something far more powerful: justice. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Headlines declared, "Jilted bride exposes Maxwell corruption." Oliver and Rebecca faced criminal charges. James negotiated his way into a plea deal. Eleanor surprised me days later by returning the pearls, telling me I had earned them by exposing the truth. Oliver's world had crumbled, but mine had been rebuilt. My firm thrived, my reputation soared, and I learned that love without respect is nothing but an illusion. Sometimes truth surfaces on its own bet, sometimes, as I proved, it needs a push. Never again would I allow someone else's mask to become my reality. As summer turned to autumn, I found myself walking through Regent's Park more often. Their leaves reminded me that transformation, though painful, was necessary for growth. Every step forward took me further from the woman who almost married a lie and closer to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to be alone. Ilalana sometimes joined me on these walks. We never spoke directly of Oliver, but his absence hung between us like an invisible thread, connecting to women who had loved and lost the same person in different ways. "You know," she said during one of our walks, "I always wanted a daughter who would carry on the Maxwell legacy of strength and integrity. Turns out I have her, just not in the way I expected." I squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of her words. By trying to destroy me, Oliver unintentionally had given me something precious, a familiar knitted not by blood or false promises, but by truth and resilience. The media eventually moved on to more recent scandals, but the lessons remained. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not to say "I do," but to have the coraggio say "I don't." What do you think strength truly means in a situation like Sophia's? Comment and subscribe for more inspiring stories. 6 months after Thanin wedding, I found myself standing in front of the former Maxwell Enterprises headquarters. The building's gleaming facade remained unchanged, but the company name had been replaced by that of its new owners. Inside, a different kind of energy pulsed through the renovated offices, one of transparency and renewed purpose. I had been invited to consult on the company's restructuring, a delightful twist, a fate that was not lost on me. The new management wanted to understand how the previous corruption had gone unnoticed for so long. Who better to explain Ethan, the woman who had uncovered it all? Walking through the familiar hallways, I passed Oliver's old office. It had been converted into a communal workspace, its imposing mahogany doors replaced by glass panels. Sunlight poured in where shadows once lurked, a fitting metaphor for the company's transformation. Claire had taken over a small division of the company, determined to rebuild her family's legacy the right way. We had slowly mended our friendship strong enough for having been tested. She had inherited her mother's strength, but channeled it to create positive change. Quarterly reports show a remarkable recovery, she announced during a board meeting, her voice firm and confident. We've retained 80% of our original workforce and implemented all the commanded transparency measures. I watched her with pride, remembering the tearful conversation we'd had 3 months prior, when she had uncovered even more of Oliver's deceit. Instead of breaking her, each revelation had only strengthened her resolve to make things right. The media had dubbed it the Maxwell Redemption, a story of corporate erect led by the women Oliver had underestimated. Eleanor had emerged from her initial shock to become a fierce advocate for corporate accountability, using her social contacts to promote ethical business practices. My own consulting firm had expanded rapidly, specializing in corporate fraud prevention. Companies sought our services, hoping to avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. Each client brought new challenges, but none matched the satisfaction of dismantling Oliver's carefully constructed house of cards. The investigation had uncovered connections to other prominent families, leading to a domino effect of exposures and resignations. Oliver's circle of privileged conspirators had crumbled, their influence evaporating under the harsh light of scrutiny. Rebecca's testimony had proven invaluable to the prosecution. She had provided details of meetings in exotic locations, of destroyed documents and hidden accounts. Her cooperation had earned her a lighter sentence, but the stigma would follow her long after her release. James had attempted to reinvent himself as a whistleblower, claiming he had always suspected Oliver's dealings. No one believed him. Last I heard, he had moved to a small town in Montana, his dreams of social climbing buried under the weight of his complicity. Oliver's trial was scheduled for the spring. His legal team had attempted every dilatory tactic possible, but justice had a way of catching up. I had been called to testify, a prospect that filled me with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. One afternoon, as I left the office, I received an unexpected call from Oliver's grandmother. "I've been going through old family albums," she said, her voice crackling with age and emotion. "There's something you should see." During dinner at her elegant home, she showed me photographs of Oliver as a child, images of a smiling boy who once held the potential for goodness before ambition and greed twisted his path. "He saw him change," she confided, her fingers tracing the edges of a yellowed photograph. "Year after year, success after success, he became someone I didn't recognize. You saw it too, didn't you?" Before anyone else, I nodded, remembering subtle moments where Oliver's mask had slipped. A cruel comment here, a dismissive gesture there. Signs I had chosen to ignore until that fateful night before our wedding. "The Maxwell name once meant something," she continued, closing the album, "thanks to you, Clara and Eleanor. It might mean something worthwhile again." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and silver. I thought about legacy, not just the Maxwells, but my own. By choosing to expose the truth, I had helped create a ripple effect of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had gained. Strength, clarity, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is not destruction, but construction, building something better from the ashes of deceit. Tomorrow, I would meet with another company seeking guidance on ethical business practices. The irony was not loathed on me. Oliver's betrayal had led me to my true calling. By trying to use me as a stepping stone, he had unintentionally helped me find my way. The night before my wedding, I had heard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I had helped build a new one, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic than the illusion I almost married. Do you believe that from the rubble of betrayal, a true calling can emerge? Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts. Spring arrived with an unexpected weight. Oliver's trial loomed on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand, my voice unwavering as I accounted every detail. His eyes never left mine during my testimony, but they no longer had the power to quicken my heart. Instead, I saw him clearly as a man whose greatest defeat was being exposed for his true nature. The evidence was overwhelming. Every document I had gathered that fateful night before the wedding became another nail in the coffin of his defense. His lawyers tried to paint me as a spiteful, vengeful woman, but the paper trail told a different story, one of spanning years. The most poignant moment came when Eleanor testified. She sat ramrod straight in the witness box, her elegant composure intact as she detailed how her own son had manipulated family funds and betrayed generations of trust. The truth, she stated clearly, her voice echoing in the silent room, must stand. Above blood, Oliver's face crumbled at her words. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break his rehearsed mask. The realization that he had not only lost his freedom, but his mother's unwavering support. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day brought new revelations, more evidence of how deep the corruption had run. Former employees testified about threats and coercion. Business partners revealed how they had been dragged into Oliver's web of deception. Despite it all, I sat in the gallery next to Claire, watching the man we had both loved reveal his darkest colors to the world. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years, with no possibility of early parole. As the judge read the terms, I studied Oliver's profile. Still handsome, but somehow diminished. The charming smile that had once conquered boardrooms and my heart was nowhere to be seen. Rebecca, having pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years. She avoided my gaze, arse was led away, her designer attire replaced by prison orange. James, charged as an accomplice, accepted a plea bargain that included community service and hefty fines. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Eleanor stepped forward, Claire and I by her sides. The Maxwell family, she announced in a firm voice, has always valued integrity above all else. Today's verdict, though painful, upholds that tradition. We thank the jury for their service and forth prevalence of justice. Later that night, we gathered at Eleanor's house, not to mourn, but to close a chapter. Claire pulled out a bottle of champagne from the same vintage we had planned to serve at the wedding. To the truth, she toasted, her eyes meeting mine, and to the sister I almost had, who turned out to be more family than my own brother. Eleanor took my hand as we drank our champagne. You know, she must. I've been thinking about what you said that day at the altar about love and truth. You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest love of all, love for justice, for what is right. The evening softened into night. Our conversation shifted from the past to the future. Claire spoke of her plans to rebrand the remaining Gledgett Maxwell businesses. Elilina shared her vision for a foundation to support corporate ethics education. As I drove home that night, the city skyline shimmered against the dark sky. The weight I had carried since the night before my wedding finally began to dissipate. Oliver's sentencing wasn't just an end. It was permission to truly begin again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared. Oliver in his prison uniform being led to his cell. Below it, Words from a sympathetic word. Thought you'd want to see this. Justice. Served. I deleted the message without replying. I didn't need to see Oliver in misery. I had already seen him at his highest and found him wanting. My revenge wasn't in his incarceration, but in the freedom I had found by exposing the truth. The wedding dress that had hung in my closet like a ghost was fiddily put away, donated to a charity that helped domestic abuse survivors rebuild their lives. The symbolism was not lost on me. What was meant to be a symbol of love and trust would now help other women write their own stories of redemption. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the girl who had once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Maxwell. She had been naive, perhaps, but her belief in justice had been her salvation. Oliver had seen her trust as weakness, not realizing it would be his undoing. The truth had cost him a wedding, but it had given me something far more valuable. The knowledge that sometimes the best lover story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to stand up for what's right on your own. Do you believe true freedom is only physical, or is it also mental and emotional? Like and share your opinions. 1 year after Oliver's sentencing, I found myself back at the Grand Royal Hotel, not as a soon-to-be bride, but as keynote speaker for a conference on corporate ethics. The irony of speaking on the very building where I had overheard Oliver's true nature was not lost on me. The ballroom was packed with executives, all eager to hear from the woman who had exposed one of the decade's biggest corporate scandals. As I walked onto the stage, my heels clicking on polished wood, I saw my reflection in the glass panels, confident, serene, and completely transformed from the woman I had been a year prior. Good morning, I began surveying the crowd. You are here today because you want to learn how to prevent fraud and corruption in your organizations. But what you really need to learn is to know the truth that hides behind perfect smiles and designer suits. In the front row, Eleanor and Claire sat proudly. Claire had successfully rebranded Maxwell's remaining legitimate assets into a new company focused on sustainable investments. Elena's foundation had already sponsored ethics programs at 3 major universities. The biggest threat to corporate integrity, I continued, isn't our sector. Sometimes it's the charming CEO with a Harvard degree. Sometimes it's the trusted partner with an impeccable record. And sometimes it's the person you plan to spend your life with. My consulting firm had grown exponentially with offices in New York, London, and Singapore. Companies worldwide sought our expertise in fraud prevention and corporate transparency. Each new client brought with it stories of near misses and close calls. Potential Oliver Maxwell's caught before thee could wreak irreparable havoc. After my speech during the networking reception, a young woman approached me. Her hands trembled slightly as she introduced herself. I'm engaged to my company's CFO, she confided. Her voice was barely a whisper. Last week, I found some discrepancies in our books. After hearing your story, I don't know what to do. I looked at her, seeing my former self reflected in her uncertain eyes. The truth isn't any easier to speak, I said softly. But living with lies becomes impossible once you see them. By the end of the day, another corporate fraud had been prevented, another scandal averted. The young woman's fiancé was quietly removed from his position, and authorities notified. She sent me a thank you note a month later, signed with her maiden name and the promise to never settle for less than complete honesty. My story had become a beacon for others, a reminder that choosing truth over comfort was not just an option. It was a necessity. Business schools used the Maxwell case as a teaching tool, and I occasionally gave guest lectures, sharing insights could only come from having loved and lost a master of deception. Clara joined my firm as a partner, her experience in rebuilding after corporate scandal proving invaluable. Together, we developed programs to help companies foster cultures of transparency and accountability. You know, she said one night as we reviewed files, I used to think Oliver was the strong one in our family. Now, I realize strength isn't about maintaining power. It's about having the courage to expose wrongdoing even when it hurts. Eleanor's foundation launched a scholarship program for women in business ethics, naming it in honor of Oliver's grandmother, who had passed away peacefully months after his sentencing. Her last words to me had been, "You saved our family's soul." The media still occasionally ran stories about the runaway bride who saved Wall Street, or in our case, the financial world of London. But my life had moved far beyond that single day of reckoning. My work had evolved from an act of revenge to a mission of prevention and protection. Oliver's appeals were consistently denied. His attempts to reduce his sentence fell on deaf ears. The evidence I had gathered that night had been too exhaustive, too damning to dispute. I sometimes wondered if he ever truly understood that his downfall hadn't been caused by my discovery of his plans, but by his own belief that love could be used as a weapon. A year after exposing the truth, I stood in my office overlooking Regent's Park, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption. On my desk was a framed photo of Elena, Claire, and me at the opening of the Foundations for Ethics Center. Beside it, a small velvet box containing Maxwell family pearls, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a reminder that sometimes the most precious inheritance is the courage to stand for what is right. The truth had not given me the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of. Instead, it had given me something far more valuable, a purpose, a mission, and a united family. Not by blood or marriage, but by an unwavering commitment to integrity. What do you believe is more valuable? A fairy tale ending or a life of purpose and truth? Don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments. 18 months after the day I walked away from my own wedding, I received an unexpected phone call. Oliver wanted to see me. His request came through his prison counselor. A meeting for closure, he stated. Ilana and Claire advised against it, their protective stance evident in their worried expressions. But something in me needed this final conversation, this last piece of the puzzle to complete my healing. The prison visiting room was austere and cold, nothing like the luxurious spaces where we once shared our dreams. Oliver sat at the orange jumpsuit contrasted jarringly with the tailored suits he once wore. His features had hardened, the polished charm replaced by a hardened authenticity I had never seen before. "Sophia," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Thank you for coming." Is it opposite him, maintaining a composed exterior as my heart raced with Murray's? "Why did you want to see me, Oliver?" He lowered his gaze to his hands, the ones that had once slipped an engagement ring onto my finger. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, about who I was, about who I am. 18 months of reflection," I pointed out. "That's a far cry from the man who thought he could get away with anything in life." "I deserved everything that happened," he admitted, surprising me with his frankness. "The truth is, I never deserved you. Not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of lost possibilities. Through the visiting room window, I could see clouds gathering, mirroring the storm of emotions in my chest. Yaukno, the Worst part, he continued, looking up to meet my eyes. I loved Ween, my twisted, selfish way. I loved you, but I loved power more. I loved the game more. Love shouldn't be a game on Oliver. No. He nodded quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the prison creating a grim backdrop to our final conversation. Rebecca has been writing to me, he said suddenly, asking for forgiveness, as if forgiveness could undo what wedded. I studied his face, seeing for the first time the cost of consequences on Eamon, who had never believed they applied to him. Are you asking for my forgiveness, too? No, he shook his head. I'm asking you to know that you were right about everything. The woman walked away from that altar was stronger than the man who stood on it. The guards signaled that our time was almost up. Oliver straightened. A shadow of his former composure returned. I heard about your work, he said. The Ethics Foundation, the consulting firm. You've built something meaningful from theses of what I destroyed. We all have, I replied. Your mother, Claire, we found strength in the truth you tried to bury. As I rose to leave, Oliver called me one last time. The night before the wedding, when you heard me, was that the first moment you knew? I paused. I turned, remembering the girl who had stood outside that door, clutching those cufflinks. No, I replied honestly. It was just the first time, I admitted. What I had always known. Leaving the prison, I felt lighter somehow. Not because Oliver had changed, or because his acknowledgement of his wrongs had given me validation. I felt lighter because I finally understood. My strength hadn't come from exposing his lies, or from walking away from our wedding. It had come from truth over comfort, justice over love, integrity over illusion. Eleanor waited for me in the parking lot, her presence a silent support. Are you okay? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Yes, I smiled, realizing it was completely true. I really am. As we drove away, I watched the Presenda sopa in the side mirror. Oliver would serve another 13 years, but I was already free. Free from the weight of the what-ifs and the could-have been. Free from the ghost of a love that was more fiction than reality. The sky had cleared, and before us, a rainbow arced over the horizon. Nature's reminder that after every storm, there's an opportunity for something beautiful to emerge. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire. The Foundation's latest initiative had received full funding. Life had a curious way of working out. I had lost a fiancé, but I had gained a family. I lost a dream, but I found a purpose. The night before my wedding had seemed like an end, but in reality it had been a beginning. The beginning of a journey towards something far more precious than the fairy tale I almost settled for. The truth, it turned out, had not only freed me, it had freed us all. Do you believe, forgive Vanessa, the ability to move on is a form of revenge in itself? Leave your opinions below. And if you've enjoyed the story so far, subscribe so you don't miss Thieneman. 1 year after my encounter with Oliver, my life had blossomed in ways I never imagined possible. The Ethics Foundation had expanded globally. Andor consulting firm had become the gold standard in corporate transparency. But it was a different kind of encounter that would mark this chapter of my story. I was giving a lecture at a prestigious business school when he noticed him in the audience, dark eyes fixed intently on my presentation, asking thoughtful questions about preventative measures against corporate fraud. He was Professor Mark Harrison, a visiting professor from a leading business school specializing in business ethics and corporate responsibility. After the lecture, he approached me with an interesting proposition. Ms. Grant, your experience could revolutionize how we teach ethics in business schools. Would you consider collaborate on a comprehensive curriculum? There was something refreshingly genuine about him. No hidden agendas, no carefully crafted persona, just sincere passion for creating positive change. Eleanor noticed it first during a foundation board meeting where Mark presented his ideas. He looks at you. The way one should look at someone they admire, she commented afterward. Not as a prize to be won, but as an equal to be respected. Our professional club slowly evolved into coffee discussions which stretched into dinner conversations. Mark never pushed, never rushed. He understood the weight of my past and respected the strength it had given me. Claire mercilessly teased me about the way my eyes lit up when discussing our curriculum project. You know, Sophia, it's okay to be happy again, to trust again. But trust wasn't something I gave easily. One evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant in the Marleone neighborhood, I told Mark everything, not just the headlines he had read, but the raw truth of loving someone who saw you as nothing more than a means to an end. His response was simple, yet profound. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It couldn't have been easy to share. Months passed and our curriculum project flourished. Business schools across the country began adopting our ethics program. Mark and I spent countless hours refining case studies, including the Maxwell scandal, now taught as a historical example of corporate fraud detection. One rainy afternoon, as we walked through Regent's Park after a successful presentation, Mark stopped under the shelter of a massive oak tree. You know what amazes me about you, Sophia? Raindrops glistened in his hair. It's not just your strength in exposing the truth, but your courage to remain open to possibility. Even after everything, I looked at him, truly looked at him, and I saw what Eleanor had noticed months ago. Here was a man who had built his career teaching ethics, not because it was profitable, but because he believed in it. Someone who saw my past not as a burden, but ushered one wisdom. The truth is, he continued, I've fallen in love with you, not the headline version, but the real you. Brilliant, compassionate, and unafraid to stand up for what's right. I ask for nothing more than the chance to show you that love can be honest, straightforward, and true. Standing in throne, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope, not the naive hope of my younger self, but something stronger. Tempered by experience and wisdom, Claire and Eleanor were ecstatic when I finally admitted I was dating again. Life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, Eleanor said, squeezing my hand. Sometimes it's the courage to expose a lie. Sometimes it's the strength to embrace a truth. The Foundation's annual gala provided a perfect opportunity to go public with our relationship. As Mark and I danced under the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Royal Hotel, yes, the very same place where I had overheard Oliver's betrayal, I realized how far I had come. You're thinking about that night, aren't you? Mark softly asked. Yes, I admit it, but not with regret. That night taught me to trust my instincts, to demand truth and love. It told me here. He smiled, understanding in his eyes. Quoting your famous speech, the truth doesn't always give you the ending you wanted, but it always leads you to the one you need. As we swayed to the music, I noticed Eleanor's knowing smile across the room. She raised her glass in a subtle toast, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in building something beautiful from the lessons it taught you. The truth that shattered my world 2 years ago had led me to a love that didn't need to be proven or demonstrated. A love as transparent and stable as the principles we both lived by. Do you believe in second chances in love? Especially after a great betrayal? Leave a comment and don't forget to like this video. 3 exact years after my almost wedding to Oliver, I stood in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting a different white dress. This one was simpler, more elegant, a reflection of the woman I had become. Elilana fussed with my veil, her eyes shining with true happiness. This time, she whispered, "Everything is exactly as it should be." Claire Bastento, the room, champagne in hand. Mark is practically floating out there. And you should see the students who came. Half the business school came to see their favorite professors get married. The venue was not a grand cathedral like my first planned wedding. Instead, we chose the botanical gardens where Mark and I had spent countless hours discussing our curriculum. Between stellenkuses and shared dreams. The guest list was smaller, but every person present represented a genuine connection. A true relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, offering me a familiar velvet box. The Maxwell pearls glittered in the morning light. Once a symbol of a dynasty built on deception, now they represented something different. The power of transformation, of turning pain into actually. I smiled, closing the box gently. I think these belong to the foundation now, a reminder of where we've been and how far we've come. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she hugged me. You truly are the daughter I was meant to have. The ceremony ways reviving my first one wasn't. Authentic, intimate, and filled with genuine joy. Mark's vows spoke not of possession or obligation, but of partnership and shared purpose. When he mentioned how my story had inspired him long before we met, how my courage had made him a better educator and person, he saw the same conviction in his eyes that I had seen during our first meeting. Mion vows acknowledged the journey that had led me here. Love isn't about perfect moments or grand gestures, I said, meeting his steady gaze. It's about choosing truth over comfort, growth over complacency, and finding someone who makes those choices with you every single day. Their reception buzzed with energy as students mingled with business leaders, illuminated by our shared commitment to ethical leadership. The Foundation's latest initiative, a scholarship program for whistleblowers looking to rebuild their careers, had just launched, turning another page in your story of transformation. Claire clinkered at her glass for a toast, her smile radiant. To my sister, not by blood, but by choice, who taught us all that the greatest love story isn't about finding the right person, but about becoming the right person. And to Mark, who showed that true love doesn't ask you to compromise your values, it elevates them. Later, as Mark and Iswade in our first dance, he whispered, "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if you hadn't ever heard Oliver that night?" I looked around the room at the family I had found, the purpose I had discovered, and the man who loved me, not despite my past, but because of how it had shaped Edmund. "That night didn't change my destiny," I replied. "It revealed it." News had us that Oliver was being considered for parole, but it felt distant, like a chapter in Samia Niels's story. His actions had set my transformation in motion, but they no longer defined me. The woman who had walked away from a false dream had found something real. A love built on truth, a purpose born of principles, and a happiness earned through courage. As the night wound down, Eleanor pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small package into my hands. Inside was a simple journal, Oliver's grandmother's from her early days as a Maxwell. She wrote about choosing truth over convenience, even when it costs you everything. Eleanor explained, "You're not just continuing her legacy, you've reinvented it." Looking at the guests, I felt a deep sense of completeness. Their revenge I once sought had transformed into something far more powerful: redemption, not just for me, but for everyone touched by our story. The truth that shattered my world had finally healed it. Piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. And when Mark looked at me and smiled, that honest, unreserved smile that had begun to heal my heart, I knew that sometimes the best endings are not the ones we plan, but the ones we earn by being brave. In Nauto, embrace the truth, no matter where it leads. The night before my first wedding had taught me what love was not. Every day since then had taught me what it truly is: a choice, a commitment, and above all, an unwavering dedication to truth, both beautiful and brutal. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. Not just surviving betrayal, but learning to love again more wisely, more deeply, and more authentically than ever. What choice do you think is the most important one in this story? Leave your comments, subscribe, and share this video. 5 years after, the fateful night that changed everything, I stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at the business school. The faces before me represented the next generation of business leaders, eager to learn from what had become known as the Maxwell case study. Mark sat in the front row. Now, head of the business ethics department, beaming with the same pride he had shown on our wedding day. Trois behind him were Lana and Claire, who never missed these annual lectures. But this year was different. This would be the last time I would tell this story. "Many of you know the headlines," I began, my voice resonating through the silent space. The jilted bride who exposed a corporate scandal, the woman who walked away from a Maxwell. But today, I want to talk to you about something more important than revenge or justice. I want to talk to you about transformation. A student raised her hand. "Miss Grant, what made you finally decide to stop giving these lectures?" I smiled, resting my hand instinctively on my belly, slightly rounded. "Our first child. Still our secret. Because some stories need toned so new ones can begin." After the lecture, Claire joined me in my office, sitting on the edge of my desk as she used to in our consulting days. "Oliver Hoss, a parole hearing next month," she said softly. "He's asked if we would speak on his behalf." The news didn't surprise me as it would have before. Time had a way of softening Gavin the sharpest edges of betrayal. "Will you?" I asked. "I might," she admitted. "He's different now. The letters he writes aren't from the brother I knew. They're from the brother I wished I'd had." Eleanor had visited him regularly over the years, watching her son slowly shed layers of deception that had defined him. She had shared his gradual transformation with me, how he had begun advising other inmates, helping them understand the ripple effects of white-collar crime on families and communities. The foundation had also evolved. What began as a response to corporate fraud had become a global movement for business ethics. The Maxwell pearls, now displayed in the lobby of our headquarters, had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the darkest truths could lead to light. Mark found me later that night in our home office, surrounded by case studies and student papers. "You're thinking about Oliver's parole, aren't you?" I nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how far we've all come. How that night before my wedding wasn't an end at all. It was a beginning for all of us. The next morning, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to the parole board, not to condemn or support, but to acknowledge change. The man I was going to marry chose deception over truth, I wrote. The man you are considering for parole has chosen to face that truth. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose truth again and again, no matter thecos. The Foundation's annual gala was held on the eve of Oliver's parole hearing. As I addressed the crowd, I saw faces that told the story of the past 5 years. Students who had become ethical business leaders, whistleblowers who had found new purpose, families who had dribbled themselves from the ashes of corporate fraud. 5 years ago, I thought revenge was about destroying something, I concluded. Now, I know it's about building something better. The greatest revenge isn't in seeing someone fall, it's in helping others rise. Later that night, Mark and Andy walked through our favorite spot in the Botanical Gardens. The same place where we had exchanged vows, where we'd had first discussed the ethics curriculum, where we would now tell our families about the new life growing inside me. You know what I love most about our story, Mark said, his hand intertwined with mine. It's that it was never really about revenge. It was about truth surfacing like a flower breaking through concrete. I thought about the journey from the bride, who had heard a devastating truth, to the woman who had made that truth her strength. From seeking vengeance to finding purpose, from a shattered dream to a life more meaningful than I could have imagined. The night before my wedding to Oliver had seemed like the end of my story. Instead, it had been the first line of a much better one. A story about choosing truth over comfort, growth over revenge, and a love that didn't need to be prevent bakers. It proved itself every day. As Mark and I walked home under Thesters, I gently touched my belly, thinking about the new chapter we were about to begin. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in the end of a story, but in the beginning, Ofa, better one. Are you ready for one final twist in this incredible story? Don't leave without liking and sharing your opinion. Full circle. It brought the most unexpected closure when exactly 6 years after that fateful night at the Grand Royal Hotel, I received an invitation that made my hands tremble. Oliver had been granted parole and Eleanor was hosting a small family dinner. The reason for the gathering stopped my heart for a moment. Oliver wanted to make formal, proper amends with everyone he had wronged. Mark squeezed my hand as we pulled up to Eleanor's house. Our daughter, Grace, slept peacefully in her car seat, oblivious to the weight the night carried. At 8 months old, she embodied everything pure and honest my life had become. Claire greeted us at the door, her eyes showing a mix of anxiety and hope. "He's different," she whispered. Ars hugged me. "Really different." Oliver stood as we entered the dining room. Prison had aged him, stripped away the polished patina he once wore as armor. His tailored suits were replaced by simple, modest clothes. But it was his eyes that showed the biggest change. Clear, direct, without the calculating gleam I remembered. "Sophia," he said softly, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Harrison, thank you for coming." Eleanor had arranged the seating carefully. Mark and I on one side, Oliver on the other, with Claire and herself as buffers. Grace's portable bassinet was by my side, and Oliver's gaze kept drifting to her with something akin to wonder. He said during the soup course, "She has your determination in her eyes." The conversation moved cautiously, like dancers avoiding invisible obstacles. Oliver spoke of his work in prison, counseling other white-collar criminals, helping them understand the true cost of their actions. He had started a program that connected incarcerated fraudsters with their victims' families, fostering understanding and genuine repentance. The Foundation's work reached us even inside, he explained. Your ethics curriculum became part of our rehabilitation program. I taught it to other inmates, never telling them the case study was my own story. During dessert, Oliver cleared his throat. I've repaired something, if you'll allow me to read it. From his pocket, he produced a worn piece of paper. Dear Sophia Hibagan, his voice steady but humble. Thank you, not for what you stopped me from doing to you, but for what you helped me become by exposing who I was. The night before a wedding, you heard the truth about who I was then. Tonight, I want you to hear the truth about who I am now. Grace chose that moment to wake, her soft cry cutting through the emotional tension. Without thinking, I picked her up, and she snuggled against my shoulder, observing the gathering with curious eyes. The Maxwell name once meant power at any cost, Oliver continued, looking at my daughter. Thanks to you, Claire, and Mum, it now means integrity. The greatest gift you gave me wasn't just stopping me, it was showing me a better way to live. Eleanor dabbed her tears as Oliver spoke of his plans. Working with the Foundation's rehabilitation program, using his expertise to prevent others from following his old path. He had already turned down lucrative offers that would have put him back in the corporate world. I've learned that true power isn't in controlling others, he said, looking directly at Mark and me. It's in controlling yourself, in choosing truth, even when lies would be easier. As the evening drew to a close, Oliver asked Tommy Grace. I found myself nodding, and Mark supported my decision with a gentle smile. Oliver knelt before her bassinet, his face soft with emotion. Hello, little one, he whispered. Your mother taught me the most important lesson of my life. I hope you grow up, Tobe, as brave and true as she is. Stepping out into the cool night air afterward, I felt lighter somehow. Ma carried our sleeping daughter to the car while I lingered on Eleanor's steps, looking at the stars. You know, Eleanor said, joining me. When you exposed Oliver's truth 6 years ago, he thought our family was destroyed. Instead, you gave us all a chance at something real. The night before, my wedding to Oliver had shown me an ugly truth that shattered my world. But from those fragments, we had all built something beautiful. A family united not by lies and obligation, but by choice and truth, as Mark. Grace and I drove home. I thought about the power of true redemption, not just saying sorry, but living differently. Oliver's transformation wasn't just an end to our story, it was proof that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in destroying someone's world, but in helping them build a better one. The truth that had once broken my heart had healed us all in ways none of us could have imagined that night 6 years ago. Sometimes the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we earn by facing our truths and choosing to grow from them.